What miracle is taking place? We asked you for springs, O earth, and what is this that is sent up from your depths? Do a new people live beneath the lava? Is the past coming back to life? Romans and Greeks, O come and see, ancient Pompeii has returned to life. Two centuries ago, the ancient city of Pompeii began to be brought to light. Scholars and visitors arrived from all over Europe, and they all left a record of those memorable discoveries in their travel diaries. To read through those pages is to relive that memory and to set off for a new and extraordinary adventure. In the last streets, as the city comes to an end, near to the great amphitheatre, where the countryside begins, stands one of Pompeii's most beautiful houses. It is not large, but has a rare beauty, and its high walls fondly shelter a flourishing garden. The main entrance of the house of Laureus Tiburtinus is situated at the far west of Via dell'Abbondanza, Pompeii's main high street. The house has a large entrance around which, in keeping with the classical Roman model, are situated both the private and reception rooms. Major work was being carried out to repair damage done by the previous earthquake. From the entrance, we gain access to the small kitchen. Here the pots and crockery are those of that day, and on the fire the fish and fowl were being cooked together with rich vegetable soups. The large courtyard on the right prepares one for the splendid frescoes of the other rooms. The small bedrooms give onto a tiny garden the size of a flower bed, which is surrounded by columns. The last room, with its imaginative architectural miniatures painted on a white or gold background, is one of the most refined examples of Pompeian decoration. From here, one went out onto a small peristyle surrounding the various rooms that protected them from extreme weather changes in the large garden. This is the great tablinum for the sumptuous official meals. Internally, it was decorated with classical scenes of Hercules and the Trojan War that celebrated the great origins of Rome. All these rooms gave onto the architecture of the finest of all the gardens of Pompeii. A long colonnade runs along the entire length of the rear of the house. Beneath the pergola there lies a deep water channel with a blue bottom, at the end of which is situated a biclinium for summer meals. Along the walls of the house, there are frescoes of Venus, Orpheus, and hunting scenes. From the great hall of Hercules, from the small rooms that gave onto the peristyle, from the biclinius and the terrace, one's eye ranged freely over the ample garden, and one would hear the play of water and smell the scent of nature. From the center of the terrace, the water flowed into a longer channel, which was interrupted by fountains, water lilies, and flanked by pergolas which ran the whole length of the garden. We now leave the villa of Laureus, and down Via dell'Abbondanza, we quickly reach a house in a completely different style. From a large terrace, one goes down a steep stairway to a portico which is almost completely underground. Unexpected wealth of decorations completely covers the walls. In the large underground triclinium, the pillars seem to become a crowd of living busts, the color of apophytic red. Surprisingly, a small thermal bath is concealed down here. As in the big public thermal baths, here there were dressing rooms, rooms for the various types of hot and cold bath, and for massages. The fine frescoes, the silver taps, everything indicates luxury and the new pleasures to be enjoyed with one's friends while discussing politics or business. Let us move now to an area behind the forum, where there are some of the oldest houses of the city. Through this narrow but intensely frescoed corridor, one reaches the atrium of the house of the tragic poet, which is perhaps one of the most beautiful in the whole of Pompeii. reception room, there is the tablinium that joins the atrium to the garden. The entire house possesses a rich refinement that is accentuated by its modest size. Here, when there is only the noise of your footsteps, you can still hear the echo of the sweet verses of Ovid singing of the love and heroism of all women. Around the atrium open the rooms of the members of the family. In one of these, by the bed, there is a tray on which a young girl has left her jewels. On the floor of the tablinium, we see the fine mosaic of the old tragic poet among the actors before the play. Onto the little concealed garden open the triclinium for meals and the little chambers full of treasures where the family and their guests would sleep. At the end of the garden, we see the terrible scene of Iphigenia, who is being led to the sacrifice by Ulysses and Achilles. Her father, Agamemnon, who has not resisted the will of the gods, shields his eyes from the terror of his daughter. Each figure seems to be acting out a part, as though in a sacred and inviolable play. But their expressions betray all their doubts. Full of fear, they seek support from one another, and they hang suspended in a time without end, waiting for a merciful angel to stop them before the horror is acted out. Only at Pompeii can one find such a celebration of culture and poetry in such a small house. Halfway down Via della Fortuna, as the sun begins to set, we enter the large house of the Faun. At the sides of the narrow corridor, in two temple-shaped shrines, are kept the gods that protected the house. In the middle of the impluvium, the small statue of a dancing faun welcomes the visitor. At the end, we have the tablinium and the great banqueting hall. At the side, two tricliniums with splendid mosaic floors. First peristyle, with its pool of water in the middle, was the center of the house. Between the two gardens, there is the great exedra, with the celebrated mosaic of the Battle of Issus. 1.5 million colored tiles represent the famous victory of Alexander the Great over Darius of Persia. We are in the noblest house of Pompeii, perhaps the best known from the whole of classical antiquity. The style of the house is still that of the older houses of the city. The austere original beauty is preserved intact, despite the succession of many new styles, in order to remind those entering of the noble origins of the family. Between the two gardens is yet another large exedra, and its entrance, also decorated by a splendid mosaic floor, points towards the second garden. From the back of the last peristyle, as from the atrium, a single prospect offers an uninterrupted view of striking beauty over the entire house. It is an extraordinary sequence, produced by the light, made up of closed rooms and open spaces that are flooded with sunlight. What I want, says drunken Trimalchonius, is all kinds of fruit to be placed round my ashes, and huge vineyards. Nothing is more useless than having splendid houses when we are alive, and not to think about the one that we're going to spend so much longer in. The mausoleum of the priestess Eumakia is of grand proportions. The monument is in the form of an exedra, and is like a majestic theatrical scene at the back of a large terrace that rises above the road. In the cemeteries, among the freshness of the trees, the shadow of death is not a chilling one. The orchards around the tombs are in blossom, and the inscriptions and reliefs sing in the sun of the glory of magistrates and citizens. The tombs, like the houses of the living, cannot be without their gardens and orchards, their irrigation wells, walls or seats where on anniversaries friends and relations can hold banquets. Nothing evokes sadness along these streets, and death becomes an extension of life in which the love of the living, their company, and their conversations are not left behind. As we go along the road out of the city, we arrive at a small farm in the area of Regina. A large vineyard surrounded the house and ensured an abundant supply of wine. At the center of the villa, there was a large courtyard for agricultural work, and in an area enclosed by a low wall, there were buried 18 vats that contained up to 10,000 liters of wine. In a large pressing room, there is a painting of Bacchus that protects the vats into which ran the wine produced by the pressing, which is done today as it was then. The kitchen, unlike the city houses, occupied an entire room. In addition to a stove, there was an oven for baking bread. The reception part of the house was constituted by a small triclinium with frescoes. There was no sleeping accommodation for the owner, who at sunset would return home to the city, much as we do today. It is evening. The houses are lighting up with torches and braziers. The smell of incense announces the freshness of the night. And one day in August 79 AD, as in a flash, the great volcano annihilated everything.